You're listening to the Gabe Molina Podcast.
Hey there, Mr. Lackey. It's me, James Arceba. I just wanted to tell you that, I just want to thank you for all the ass whoopings you gave me when I was in elementary. I want to say that you kept me in line, you kept me straight. Sorry for being a pain in the ass when I was younger, but hey, I was a boy in 6th grade that didn't know any better. But you know what? I had you to keep me in line. Miss you, love you, and hope to see you soon. Somewhere down the line, my friend. Take care. God bless. Love you, Mr. Lackey.
Steve Lackey, from this point on, I am going to refer to you as Mr. Lackey, simply out of respect.
Well, I appreciate it. You're certainly welcome to call me whatever.
I'll call you Mr.
Probably
Lackey.
have at one time or another.
You know, if my daddy was around and I called you Steve Lackey, I'd get in a whole lot of trouble when I go home.
Yeah, I know how that works. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you coming out. I know we tried to get together a couple of years ago.
It's been 2 years ago we tried, and we just couldn't make connection. Yeah.
Well, one thing is you're no longer in Texas full time.
No.
So people know you are. You're an educator from down south. You live down south. You were my principal twice.
Yeah, elementary and high school.
All my close people.
Didn't get enough.
No. Well, I feel like we were just such a good class. You came back for a second round.
I needed 2 doses. Yes.
Well, hey, so what gets you over here to Texas?
Well, we've been in. Jan and I moved to Florida when our girls moved to Florida. She said, "Let's go," and so we moved to Florida in probably 2010. And we had plans to work for Disney and part-time and travel and all that. And long story short, we ended up having to work part-time for Disney. We didn't get to do the traveling as much as we wanted to, but we did that. In fact, I stayed 10 years. I got to retire from them. So.
Oh, really?
But
you were a boat captain, right?
I drove boats for the friendship boats at Epcot. Yeah, that was a blast.
That's probably the coolest job they have, isn't it?
It's that or the guys that drive the boats over at Magic Kingdom, which are the ferries, the big things, and those scare me to death, so I wouldn't do that. And now the friends of mine that's still there, they prefer the pontoon boats over at Disney Springs. And that's because they get on the boat and they're not bothered by a supervisor. They just stay on that boat. Thing. Yeah, they stay on it all day and take a lunch break and then get back on it and drive the same boat. They don't have any partners or anything like that. But the reason we came to Texas at this time, I have a good friend of mine that my class of 68, the men get together every spring. They call it the Boys of 68. And they've always invited me. I get calls every year. Are you going to come? I said, I'm not going to drive 11 or 1,200 miles for a 2-hour lunch or whatever. And but as we get a little bit older, I got to thinking I better get down there if I'm going to see any of those guys again. And so we decided to do that. And get down there, and I'm shaking hands with everybody and hugging necks and all of that. And
how many of you are in that group?
Well, they have anywhere from probably 15 or so to maybe sometimes 20 that get together.
It's a good group.
And we've lost a number of them over the years. Some of them a long time ago. Anyway, get down there. And we had 2 boys named Jimmy, and they usually bring Bert with them. They all ride from up around Kennedy and come that way. And I said, "Where's Bert at?" And, well, we don't know. We couldn't get a hold of him. He didn't answer his phone. He wouldn't respond to text or anything like that. We find out a week after we had this meeting that he had already been dead 4 days.
Oh,
That's
wow.
why he wasn't answering his phone.
Wow.
You mentioned the Agent Orange thing we were talking about a while ago. Bert was in Vietnam, and he always said Agent Orange would get him. Now, he was in very good shape. He was a weightlifter. He had been a pumping iron all his life. He was a great physical specimen. He said he walked out of his house to go feed cattle and evidently had a massive heart attack and died right there.
Wow.
So you just don't know when your time's going to be up. And then we had, I'm not going to mention the names, but we did have a friend in George West that I visited the other day that had a mild stroke. Mm-hmm. And he's doing well. He's going to be okay, but could have been worse. So.
Yeah, I was talking last podcast I did with Bo. We lost Jamie Lockhart just recently.
That, and I had Jamie on Facebook, and I was keeping up with her and encouraging her to do the best with her cancer. And she wasn't very optimistic about it, but she was going to fight it, and then she passed away.
It's funny. It's funny. I was telling Bo, and here I am giving life experience to the guy who has all the life experience, but. I told him, we kind of, in my mind, I break life up into like 20 years, right? In 20 years, you're trying to be an adult and you're trying to achieve things and buy things that you always wish you had. And then, when you, after 40, you start kind of reevaluating things and you start to change what your priorities are, and it's funny because a lot of times that priority is gaining more access to money or more access to events or things. And now it's kind of like you just want to pump the brakes. And you always hear people tell you, hey, time's precious. And when you're young, you're like, I got all the time in the world. Until you realize you don't have all the time in the world. And you lose somebody in their 40s or their 30s or even their 20s, or in their 70s. And, you start to reevaluate things. But what are your priorities these days?
Oh, be around family as much as possible. I'm fortunate both my girls live in Florida. Of course, that's why we moved there, so we get to see them all the time. Have one grandson. That looks like that's probably all we're going to have, but we're glad to have him. He's get home in time. He's got a show pig. They do their little shows a little differently out there. I think his is just going to be within his school system, and so we get home in time for that. He's big into Boy Scouts. He's got his eye on that Eagle Scout thing one of these days, and so we enjoy seeing him achieve that. But and to try to stay as healthy as we can. I don't know how many people know it, but my wife has Alzheimer's. We've been fighting this for I guess for about 4 years now, and that's one reason I'm really going to miss my friend that passed away recently, because his wife also had Alzheimer's.
Oh, wow.
And we would call each other and share notes and cry on each other's shoulder.
Yeah.
They were kind of our own personal support group, and I don't have that anymore.
Yeah.
But I tell people, they ask me what it's like, and I said, well, if you ever saw the movie 50 First Dates, it's kind of like that, but not as funny.
Yeah.
Because every day it's something over and over. I mean, I probably had to tell her 20 times that I'm coming to do this with you, and but she remembers you. And so we'll hug his neck and tell him I love him, but I just don't think I can sit through that, And but
you still owe me a neck hug.
I do. All right, I do, and you'll get it. So,
well,
but
good.
That's pretty much it. Yeah.
It's we lost Dad late last year, and I tell everybody I did a little video after he died, and it's kind of, he had 80 days where he had to go to hyperbarics. And it's I tell everybody that was our blessing, because we would never get to spend that much time with him. Everybody's working, everybody's got obligations, family members, things going on, things they want to do.
Yeah, life gets in the way.
And that forced, me, Barbara, Mom, Vidal and Joe to spend time with Dad, and it was funny because I look back afterwards and I'm like, man, those 80 days were special. They were brutal. There was a lot going on there, but we're lucky to have had it. So, you start to look at things a little differently, and you start to realize, I guess, what. Well,
sometimes I sit around and wonder, when did I turn into a senior citizen? I mean, it just wasn't that long ago. We were roaming the halls of George West and working with you guys and rounding you up and getting you to class, and then you retire, and then you pick up a couple other. I did several things after I retired. to stay busy. I actually probably finally quit working at age 70.
Oh, wow.
So the pandemic shut us down in Disney.
Yeah.
And they called and asked if I wanted to come back, and I said, no, I'm enjoying retirement too much right now. So,
Good.
And besides that, I had too many aches and pains and standing on that concrete all day long for, most of my shifts were anywhere from 6 to 8 hours. Disney didn't like paying overtime.
Yeah.
And you can leave that in there. I don't care. So, yeah, they don't do overtime, and they just hire more people.
Yeah.
And so the 6-hour shifts were wonderful for me. I loved them.
Yeah.
Go do it, be home. So it was fun.
So what I talk to people often, and one thing that always comes up is mentorship. I look back, and a lot of times I go, man, I don't remember ever like pursuing a mentor. To me, it was like, well, Dad knows everything I need to know, right? As I got older, I realized he knew a lot of things, but maybe not everything I needed to know. I think for a lot of people, you were a mentor. So I think growing up, who would have been your mentor?
Oh, growing up, definitely my parents. I mean, I grew up at an age when, kind of like probably in George West, when if something happened at school or you did something that would be a bit out of line,
everybody
knew about it. And we had, I lived in an oil field camp, if you know what those are, but all the major companies had camps, which where your houses were and your athletic fields were, and you caught the bus to go to school. And Humble had a big one. It was called Humble back then. It wasn't Exxon. There were a couple of men that were our neighbors that were just like parents, and the moms too. I mean, Jack and Mildred were a couple that just if they told you to do something, you jumped in the minute, you did exactly what they told you to do, and you wouldn't do anything to disgrace them, embarrass them. You had your parents in mind all the time, and so I guess Mom and Dad, and then my football coaches. I love those guys. I mean, I didn't always agree with them sometimes, but one of them was even my Sunday school teacher, and so we had him on Sundays, and so those guys were. And I knew them later in life. In fact, Coach Reddick he was high school principal. He coached at Gregory Portland with Aikens, but then he also became their high school principal. And so he was a wonderful guy. Our head coach, he was strong in the Catholic Church, and shows you how naive I was. I didn't know a white guy could be Catholic, and I had to go to a funeral one time there, and he did some of the readings. And all of those guys were. And I had female teachers. My Spanish teacher, Miss Gates, was a wonderful lady. I had a geometry teacher that was fantastic. This friend of mine, whose wife is Alzheimer's, her mother was my sophomore and senior English teacher.
Oh, really?
Now, she wasn't a lovey, huggy kind of person,
Sure.
but she was a heck of an English teacher, and we got a good foundation from her. So when we went to college, we were able to do pretty well under her.
So are some of those influences what kind of led you into education? Or?
Definitely. I had a good time in school.
Yeah.
I loved high school. I liked junior high. I don't remember that much about elementary other than having to come in and learn some poetry because I talked too much in class, I guess. They keep you in at recess. But yeah, I had a great experience in school. I had a great experience with my classmates, teachers. That's not to say I didn't cross the line every now and then.
Sure.
But they were fair when they dealt with me. And so, but yeah, I'm sure that's why I ended up that way. It wasn't for the money, that's for sure.
No, my wife's a school teacher, and I always tell my nephews, don't marry a school teacher.
Oh yeah, my daughters financially do so much better than we did.
Yeah.
But they work in the corporate sector, and private world, I guess. Michelle's at Disney, and Sarah's with Walmart, and in fact, she just got a good promotion, so she's doing
awesome.
real well.
Congratulations to them.
To her, yeah.
Yeah.
Keeps her out of my pocket.
It's funny because you're talking about coming and meeting your buddies, and spending some time with him. And I tell my wife often, my wife's got some good friends, and I try not to be a jerk and say, hey, my friends compared to your friends kind of thing. But, when I try and explain to her growing up in a small town, I always I've got friends that I've had a long time. And I always kind of reference Trey Moffitt because he was always Moffitt, I was Molina, and I told my wife, I said, I've been with Trey since we were 4 years old. Yeah. And here we are, 47, and we've known each other since we were 4.
Trey would be a good one to follow.
He's a good one
to be a friend of. Yes.
I still reach out to him. I try. I've got a whole bunch. I still talk to Lee and James and all those guys. Thomasy.
I got them all on Facebook.
Yeah,
one of them.
They're still great guys.
Except Trey. I don't think Trey does much on Facebook, but Krista's on. I get her.
I usually reach out when I'm looking for advice. I usually use Bo and Trey. And when I want an answer, I go to Bo. When I need an answer, I go to Trey. Because I know one's more dessert, one's more vegetables. So Bo's the dessert. So
I can imagine.
But it's so interesting growing up in a small community like that. There's not a lot, especially back then and when you were younger too. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have cell phones that we were in had our head in all day.
I wonder how we ever got together.
You want to know what's funny is in the summer times, we would spend half the day walking from one side of George West to the other to get each other. Yeah. And then we'd stop at Trey's house and eat because his mom would always go to Corpus to get groceries. And then we'd go play in the Little League field or the baseball field. And we did that every day all summer. We'd sleep on the porta pits in the summertime, or in the spring. But it was... that's just what we did, and now we see all these kids and they're kind of disconnected because of the connecting
all
devices. All
they want to do is sit around and do this.
Yeah, and it's so unfortunate. But who are some characters that you grew up with that heavily influenced you, good or bad? I'm sure everybody wants to hear the bad because you were always getting on people for doing the bad stuff.
All right. Well, you have to know how to be bad, I guess, to correct those things.
Yeah.
So you have to walk. I was always told when I growing up in Freer that the best outlaw hunters make good game wardens.
You're 100% right.
So probably the same thing with us. So I think we basically were good kids. We and I know a lot of kids won't believe this, but I know there were a few guys in my class that drank, but they did it at home with their parents. Mm-hmm. In general, we didn't drink. I can remember going out and never seeing alcohol with any of our groups. Yeah. Well, we were convinced we were going to be state champions, and our coach said if you do things like that, it shortens your wind, it kills your discipline, and all. And we believed him. And I guess then we played Hebbronville, and those guys drank heavily. they beat us, and George West, and so.
Yeah, but they were probably 20 years old too when you guys were playing us.
They might have been. But our quarterback, Tommy Grant, and we lost Tommy very early. He ended up with a brain tumor, a tumor around the stem of his brain that got him. And I don't know where he got that from. He worked offshore. He tried to go to work for Aramco. His dad worked for Aramco out in Saudi. And he couldn't get on with them, but he did work with another big company and offshore in South America. And he'd work 24 on, 24 off kind of deal. He had a good job with them. He didn't work the floor. He was an engineer of some kind. But anyway, Tommy, you could never win an argument with him. I told him, I said, I could literally argue with a fence post and have a better chance of winning the argument than I can with you. I said, and you're wrong. But he wouldn't admit it. Yeah. But he was such a good friend, and he was a great athlete for us, and he was quite an influence. I have my college roommate who is, and I'll give you his name, Johnny Anderson. If you ever go to Freer, you'll see that baseball field is named after him.
Oh, okay.
He was the coach that took Freer to the state championship in 2A and won it in baseball.
Wow.
And Johnny was an outstanding baseball player. He played second base. I played first base. We roomed together in college. I played center. He played right guard. I mean, we just did everything together, and we were connected until he decided to be a rodeo cowboy one night in Marion, Texas. and fell off the horse and broke his arm.
Wow.
And that was his throwing arm. And that just broke his heart. But he did have enough surgeries where he got about 90% of it back, because he played a lot of softball. He played with some of those leagues in Corpus Christi, and they had state championships. But Johnny was an influence, a positive one, and he's still doing well, lives in Freer still. And so there were a lot of guys like that. I mean, I could just go down the list. What was unique about our class, I thought, was that you weren't just an athlete. We were very good friends with our valedictorian. I mean, Jimmy was not an athlete, but he was a great guy. We had another fellow, Larry Richter, was a brainiac. He was a smart guy, became an engineer. We lost him very early of a heart attack. I'll tell you a quick funny story about him. We had a cannon. Every time we would score, they would fill this cannon with a gas of some sort, had cellophane over the end of it to hold that gas, and they'd hit the spark plug with the battery, and boom, it would shoot that cannon off. Well, one night they couldn't get it to go off. And so Larry got around the front to see what was wrong with it, and it went off right in his face. Now, initially, that's not funny, but when you saw him 2 days later with no eyebrows and the sunburn all over his face, it was hilarious. But yeah, Larry got shot with a cannon and survived.
As long as nobody's hurt.
Nobody. Well, he wasn't hurt bad. He was probably in pain at one time, but and his hearing was off a little bit for a while, I think. So and they still don't know what they did wrong. But we didn't quit firing the cannon. We fired it.
Well, y'all kept scoring.
Time. Yeah. Yeah. So.
You know, it's funny that you say that, because I feel like you were such a good influence on so many of us. And I say us, namely my group and the age group around us. But it's funny that you say that, because we would talk about that at times too, where we had our little group of friends, but we were friends with everybody.
Yeah.
We were friends with the folks from the lake. We were friends with Shannon James and the school governing, class kind of thing. And it's like everybody got along.
Yeah.
And, part of me is like, to me, that's kind of what you get out of a small town. I mean, yeah, you can go the other way where people hate each other, but maybe it was a culture that maybe you were building, or maybe it was also just a culture of the town.
I think it was the town. I wouldn't take credit for it, but I enjoyed being a part of it, and maybe helping continue to nurture it. And a lot of our teachers did that because they all grew up in small towns, So yeah, I would give credit to the town, and I go back to the parents that encouraged you guys just to be good people.
Yeah,
raised you right.
It's funny because I tell everybody I was the last person my father would ever believe. If Miss Moffett called him and said, "Hey, Gabe did X, Y, and Z," and I showed up and I would tell him I didn't do any of that. And Dad would kind of do that woman thing where he'd say, well, you calling her a liar? And I'm like, no, I'm not calling her a liar. He says, well, then come here. It's time to get your spankings.
Yeah, I had my share of those growing up. I didn't like them, I guess. I appreciate it. In fact, I was the oldest in the family, and I'm the one that Dad set the example with. If he'll behave, then all others will fall in line.
Yeah.
So they could get away with anything. My youngest brother figured out that if he would just fall on the floor and start going in convulsive fits, that he wouldn't get a spanking. Oh, we can't whip him. Let's go whip Steve.
He can take it.
So Steve is gone by then. I was to college.
It's funny. I was the youngest out of my siblings, and probably the hardest to deal with for Dad. But one thing that I always tell people Dad would remind us of, Dad was never a great explainer of why he wanted us to do things. It was always because he said so.
Yeah.
But
that was enough.
That was enough. But at the same time, he would tell us how we were representative of him. We're representative of the family.
Right.
And don't make us look bad when you go to town.
Shame.
And that was something that we carried. And what's funny is I think just like you said, your dad getting you in line, everybody else will fall in line. I think it was kind of one of those things where I think everybody else had good parents as well. But I think there was a bit of that where my friends would see us catching the lecture, and it would influence them as well.
Behavior,
so.
Yeah.
I'll get a little serious. I always wanted to ask you this because when we were in high school, we lost 4 friends. There was 5 in a car wreck, and the 4 of them passed. And I always think about, when we're interacting with each other as friends and we talk about that, and it's kind of gotten to the point now where we just all, it still influences us. We still have that conversation about that night and losing everybody. And, when you go to that many services in a day, it stays with you.
Yeah, I went to 3 in one day.
Yeah. What does that, for you guys, because I think the school did a great job with us because it was such a important and sensitive thing that had happened to us at a very young age. What was your guys' approach to that for us? Because I think y'all did a good job helping us get through it.
Well, when you're going to college and you're taking all these pedagogy lessons and courses, there's not a single one I'm in there about that type of situation. That was catastrophic. We lost, when I was in high school, we lost a very good friend of mine. She was a cheerleader, but it was just her, and it was sad. When they buried her, she's in her cheerleading uniform with a homecoming mom. Wow. And that doesn't get you nothing, So, I think the thing that I think Kelly was there at the time, right? Kelly James. Mm-hmm. We when I found out about it, the kids just wanted to hug each other, they wanted to be with each other. And so we basically just let you do that. We weren't going to round everybody up and stick you in class and say it's time for algebra or time for history. The classes were there. We encouraged you to go, but we didn't worry about it too much. Just be together. And because we knew it would be bad if we forced you into some bad feelings. So and we were affected ourselves. We had Smiley's brother had just come back from Del Valley, I think, and had come back to school in George West, and I'll never forget when Ray Garcia told me that he went to Smiley's house and talked to Mr. Carvajal and told him that I think your son's been in a bad accident, something bad's happened. He said, no, he's in the bedroom asleep. Yeah. And he said, I don't think so. You better go check. And he went there and the bedroom was empty. And I still think about that sometimes, what chills it runs through me, how he must have felt because he thought his son was safe in bed. And he was out just having a good time with his friends. Yeah. And snuck out for a little fun. And so that was, and you're right, the 3 services in one day, and they were all different kinds. And I think the one with the girls, they didn't have a service for them, I don't believe.
I don't think they did either. I think it was just the boys.
And we did go out to their house. Mr. Nicholson and I drove out there and visited with them for a while, and whatever we could do for them, we'd help them. And so it was a tough time. Yeah, tough time. But then again, we had what was it? I think there were 2 or 3 girls that just for their grief process, they decided to get in the car and go right around. Darn it, they didn't go out and have a wreck. And thank goodness they weren't hurt. But kids just don't think it's going to happen to them. Yeah. Yeah. And we never. My group is the same way. Yours is no different. I doubt that they're any different today. It's just not going to happen to us, Yeah. But it'll happen to somebody, and you just pray it doesn't happen to you.
It's my wife makes a good. We talk about. She's really good at special needs, and I tell her I don't understand how you're so good at special needs. And she's told me one time, she says, I don't have a teaching certificate. Like, I didn't go to college I have a teaching certificate. I didn't go to college for a teaching degree. She goes, so I interact with these kids like I would just a regular kid. Yeah. And it's funny because it reminds me of a lot of how we interacted back then in George West. It never felt, for me anyway, everybody has their own experiences, but for me, it never felt yes, you had your respect level, you had your authority, you had your, your admin, your staff, you had your teachers, and there was a line there, but it was never this rigid line, right? Miss Donaldson talked to us. It was almost like you, Miss Donaldson, Mr. Nicholson, Miss Lansford, and several other people. A lot of times we would joke amongst each other and say, they know what they have. They know what they're dealing with.
Yeah.
We're idiots, but we're not out to cause trouble. We might get in some, but we're not deliberately trying to affect people negatively. We're just trying to have fun. And a lot of times I feel like we were handled that way. It was like you still were putting us, you still had us in check, but it was like, I know what I'm dealing with because you've probably seen it before growing up.
Or did it? Yeah.
Or did it?
Yeah. Yeah. I would remind teachers. I said, just remember. I said, these guys are going to grow up in just a very few years, because you guys were already 16, 17 years old, and in 4 or 5 years, you're going to be voting and going to the military. And I said, they're going to grow up. Let them have a little fun while they're growing up. Now, we're not going to let them go off the rails and jump off the deep end, but give them a little room, and they'll be all right. And you did. You turned out great. And we got lucky.
I think we all did. I would ask you, I think I didn't appreciate him till I got older. What was Mr. Nicholson like? I feel like he was very quiet. So
David was one of the most cerebral men I ever met in my life. He was maybe kind of walked a little to the beat of a different drum, but it's like when the valedictorian, salutatorian would come to me and they need a little help with their speeches. I said, go talk to David Nicholson. The guy can write anything, and he was a wordsmith. Now, he was seen a little differently by a lot of people, but he had a good heart. He wanted good things to happen for kids. And I know I think David was a chaplain in the military during Vietnam. And he had a chance to take a higher commission to be a captain if he would go to Nam. And circumstances in his life didn't allow for that to happen. And that left him a little scarred, I think, for a while. But the fact that he was, I'm not sure he ever went to divinity school or anything like that. But I do know that he was probably a pretty good lay minister, and so though that in itself went a long ways with working with kids. And he was originally, I don't know if you remember when he started out, he and I first met, he was a high school counselor. And then we started getting a few classes a little bit bigger. I think it was y'all's class that had over 100 in it, which for us was a big class.
Yeah.
And about that time, the principals had to start doing very serious evaluations on teachers, which meant we were in the classroom a lot. And so I needed someone outside the classroom to help deal with the day-to-day operations of the school. And David, I convinced Mr. Williams and the board to let us hire an assistant principal, which for a high school of our size, assistant principal was probably stretching it a bit, but we had so many other things we had to do. Now, if I didn't have to go in the classroom and write up evaluations until I was blue in the face, we could have got by without one, but that's how he ended up there. And to me, he was the logical choice. So.
It's funny because I didn't interact with him much. It was very interesting because when you send people to him to help them write papers, it's funny because I was like, man, we always tried to avoid Mr. Nicholson because we were nervous. But I remember one day, and I think it was him, but it was cold outside, and so stupid. But my friends lit my trapper keeper on fire, and because they said they wanted to stay warm. And I remember Mr. Nicholson came out and found it and called me in the office, and I remember thinking, I was like, oh, he's gonna light me up. And I went in there and he said, are you doing all right? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, all right, just want to make sure. He said, your stuff was on fire. And I said, yeah, I think they were trying to keep warm. It was my brother. And he said, I just want to make sure you didn't need anything out of there. And I said, no, sir. And it was funny because that was probably one of my few interactions with him. Because like I said, to us, he was very quiet, so it's the quiet ones you always kind of stay away from because you're like, I don't know what's going to happen. But as I got older and I learned more about him, I was like, you know what, he's a highly intelligent, good guy.
Very much so.
Did he end up retiring from out of there, or did he go into something else?
No, he retired. He was, I think he retired about the time I did, or close to that. Then he went to work, I think, for the county and doing some kind of county inspection. So I don't know if you knew or not, but David passed away.
I did.
Yeah, years ago. A year or so ago. I can't remember exactly. I heard about that through the grapevine. I never heard. Once he and I went our separate ways, we didn't do Facebook or keep up with each other, and I don't think David did either. So I found out through him, through other people in George West, how he was doing. So
who are some other people that you worked with that helped you, I guess, make your life a little easier or more difficult?
Well, the first one was Charles Williams. He was our superintendent. See, I was an ag teacher in Mathis.
He'd been there a while, right?
Yeah. I think he stayed superintendent 13, 15, I don't know. Hey, well, I was there. I stayed in George West 20 years, longest I ever stayed. I lived there for longer than I lived in Freer. And but Charles Williams was a mentor. He was a friend. We just had a lot of great times together, but I met him in Mathis, and I was an assistant principal at Laredo, and wanted to get out of that job as quickly as I could.
It was Laredo.
Well, we had 1,500 kids in school out there, so I went from being an ag teacher on a Friday in Bruni, Texas, where I had maybe 40 kids total, to that Monday, I was the assistant principal at Laredo United.
With 1,500?
And they were having student body elections. They let them they went in front of the student body and gave speeches. It was very political. And so while we're there, the principal thought it'd be a good time to introduce their new assistant principal, because Laredo United had never had a full-time assistant principal. The head football coach, in his spare time, was the assistant principal, and you know how much he enjoyed that.
Sure.
So he was glad to have me. I became his best friend for a while, even though he was a T-SIP, but we were good friends. Anyway, I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
Oh, you were. They introduced you.
He was going to introduce me to the student body, and I stood up and waved, and I literally got booed.
Really?
By the student body.
Laredo never disappoints.
So I said, okay, this is going to be fun. They were just having fun. They were already riled up, and a couple of those speakers had them stirred up, And so once they got to know me, and once they found out what I was like, they were okay with me. But being the assistant principal is kind of like being the cop. I told the board member one time, it's like being a cop without a gun. And I said, it doesn't matter, you couldn't use it anyway. But yeah, I was the bad guy on campus and dealt with the in-school suspensions and all that kind of stuff. So
that's a big jump from going from being an ag teacher to being assistant principal. Yeah,
it wasn't like I had summer to transition into that.
Yeah.
And I stayed the next year. I did that April through June, and then I did all the next year. But I knew right away I was wanting to go somewhere else. Well, I was good friends with the FFA, or the Ag Department area supervisor, Billy Steelhammer. Well, Billy had been a teacher at Mathis for many years, and he knew they were going to be losing their ag teachers, so he immediately started recruiting me. And I knew the Williams family because the way we did our feed for our animals in Bruni, we didn't have a place to get it. I mean, there was no place in Bruni to get quality feed for livestock. So I would go to Alice Feeder Supply, and I started out with, and I can't remember the two men that ran it, the son and the father that ran it, but Johnny Williams and his buddies bought it. Well, Johnny and Charles were brothers, Johnny and I developed a relationship. He let Charles know where there was an ag teacher that might be willing to get back into the game. And so that's how I met him. And Charles and I became best friends. And there were other guys. There was a maintenance man in Mathis, Quinn Walters. Quinn was a character and a great friend. Lonnie Messer was an ag teacher I worked with in Mathis, and Lonnie's still live and kicking and living there in Live Oak County. And I enjoyed my time with him, learned a lot. Some things to do, some things I didn't think I wanted to do. But my ego got to me, and I just thought I needed to be back in a single teacher department. That's how I ended up in Kennedy. Kennedy was not, for me, it was not comfortable. I didn't have the relationship with the students. I don't know how to put this delicately. But
they're a little rough in Kennedy.
Yeah. The groups didn't always get along.
Yeah.
And I didn't get that.
Yeah.
Because I grew up in Fair, Texas, where we all got along.
Sure.
I worked in George West, where we all got along. Mathis, we pretty well got along. Now, the governments didn't always get along. They had a school system, they had a city government, but they were separate from each other. But the kids got along and did well together. And so, yeah, I wasn't too comfortable with that. And my kids were working a football game. We parked cars for a little money for the chapter. And we were playing George West. They were playing in Kennedy. I saw Charles pull up there and ask him how things were going, and he said, oh, and I'd heard that he was going through some transition issues there with some of the staff. And he said, you're not still wanting to be a principal, are you? I said, I hadn't thought about it much, but I knew I did not enjoy the relationship I had with the high school principal in Kennedy. He was a good guy. He was trying to do the best he could, but he just couldn't get it done. And I said, that's when I decided I can do as good as he can.
Yeah.
You know, in fact, I think I could do better. And so that got my connection back to George West. Well, he called me over the next week and was going to set up an interview. I was one course short.
Oh, really?
I had to have so much done within 5 years. Mm-hmm. And since I wasn't going back into I swore I'd never go back to administration, though I didn't have all my coursework done. And when he found that out, the process had already started. He'd already called the board meeting. They were going to interview a couple of people. And so the guy I was going against ended up getting the job. But I got a call that summer that said, did you ever get that coursework done? I didn't get it from Charles. I got it from Dennis Moyer. Dennis said, did you ever get that course? Charles wants to know, did you get that coursework done? I said, yeah, I'm done. He said, all right. He said, I think there's an elementary principal job coming up. Get your application in. And so that's how I ended up in George West.
Wow.
So, and it was a blessing. It really was. 20 years, I couldn't have asked for a better place.
Yeah, you positively influenced so many people there. You know, when I told people we were coming, they were excited. You know, it's as a matter of fact, I got a couple of people who wanted to share a little something with you. One of them's a little long, but we'll play it anyway.
Gabe Molina, Mr. Lackey, coming at you from North Padre down
Bo
by
John.
Corpus. I heard you were going to interview Mr. Lackey, so I wanted to tell my one story that stuck with me forever. Besides Mr. Lackey just being a prominent figure, and you know, I always thought of him as being a disciplinarian and really doing a great job at the school. But I remember my junior year, they were, you know, building the new cafeteria right across from the high school in the area of the old playground. And they were pouring the concrete one day, and I think we were on our way to athletics, and it was me, Gabe Aguilar, and Eugene Solis. We thought it would be funny and neat if we put our football numbers in there, and we were thinking, oh man, that's going to be there forever. And as dumb as we were, they knew exactly who we were because our football numbers were in the concrete. And got called into Mr. Lackey's office. And I was mortified because I didn't like to be in trouble. I'd never really been in trouble. And he said, hey, we know it was y'all that put your numbers in there, and talked to us about it. And I was thinking, oh man, I'm gonna, get ISS. I've never had ISS before. And he said, no, y'all show up on Saturday, and you're gonna break it out, and you're gonna help replace it. Just for some reason that stuck with me forever, because it really taught me a lesson. I went out there and I showed up with the maintenance guys. I was embarrassed because I felt like an entitled kid that had put that in there, and really it was destruction of property. I didn't think about it that way at the time, but we used jackhammers. We broke it out. They ended up pouring the concrete, but I just felt like he could have easily given me licks, given us ISS, but he told us to go fix it. And I felt like it gave me a chance to do something right. And for some reason, it always stuck with me. I thought it was a neat story, and wanted to pass that on. It's also been fun seeing, you always, your teachers, your principals, you think of them one way, and it's been nice to follow Mr. Lackey and see that he's been traveling, doing a bunch of time with family and enjoying his life after work. So congrats, and thank you, Mr. Lackey, for everything done over the years.
Now you get the little catch in your throat when you hear stories like that. But because you never know at the time when you do something with someone, if it's the right thing, the wrong thing, what kind of impact's it going to have. You just want it to be positive. And I can remember, and this is not a good story, but I remember my dad trying to teach me spelling. I was having a difficult time with spelling. And he thought the way to do it is every time I misspelled a word, he'd give me a lick. And I remember being in the bathroom, being over that clothes hammer, and of course a kid can't think.
Sure.
When you got a huge man that worked in the oil field behind you with a leather belt, he's going to whack you again, So I just didn't think that was always the right way. Now, there were some times I think corporal punishment was probably warranted, although, to tell you the truth, we got toward the end of my career, we just pretty well decided there were better ways to deal with than beating kids. And besides that, we never gave the girls licks. So why do you spank the boys but not the girls?
We probably needed it, though. My dad looked for that paper every year. Where did I sign?
I don't know that it probably hurt you, because we try to do it with as much dignity as.
Sure.
I can remember when we got licks, and I did get licks one time in junior high. I wasn't perfect. We got into an eraser fight between class. They let us just wander the halls back then. There were no teachers on duty. They trusted us. We were supposed to be good guys, and we got in. It was Christmas time, and we were throwing these erasers from one room to the next, and some things got knocked off the Christmas tree, and a door to the principal's office got hit because his office was right next to the classroom, and so somebody said, he's coming. So the very first thing I did, we had our junior high was built a little bit like the junior high in George West, so there was no air conditioning, so the windows were kind of high off the ground. First thing I did, I bailed out that window. He wasn't coming down the hall because I almost landed on his shoulders. He was outside doing playground duty, and I came within 10 feet of jumping right on the principal. And he asked me what in the world I was doing, and being the good guy I am, I just told him what I was doing. And so he gets in the hallway, and I think he rounded up 13 of us. I swear by the time I got my licks, I was back in class and halfway through with my work, and he was still giving licks. You could hear. I think he had to stop and rest for a little bit. So we were definitely not angels, but I had a good principal. Mr. Stolte was fair. He treated us with respect. He just wasn't quick to grab the paddle when something else might work better. Now, we didn't have in-school suspension back then, but just a chastising by him, and then knowing your parents were going to find out, that was enough.
It's funny because that story that Bo just told, like I said, my wife's a school teacher now, and there's a lot of times where it seems like the schools have gone to this broad brush, right, zero tolerance kind of thing. and everything kind of gets handled a certain way. And there's a lot more lawsuits now than there probably were back when we were growing up. But it's funny because handling a kid or a scenario by evaluating the scenario and that kid and having the disciplinary action coincide with the two, I think makes a bigger impact.
Yeah, I want to know why they did what they did. What caused them to think they had to do that?
And then for them to actually have to see what it takes to do the work. That, you know what I'm saying? To know that, hey, these men out here that are doing this work, this is what it takes.
I got to see, on this trip, I've been blessed to see a number of people. I mean, I kind of went, I got my dates wrong, so I had to go to Bruni first, then I went to Alice and saw those guys, and then we came to George West, and then we came up to Bernie. I wanted to see Donna Hill. It used to be Donna Williams, but I wanted to see Donna. And Becky came to lunch with us one day. And we got to talking about the time that I found a bunch of kids painting the parking lot.
Oh.
And,
let me pause. Let's pause real quick.
All right.
So I think we were juniors. I want to say Leah Lanice and a few other people were sitting in Justin Likens' parents' house. And the seniors were painting the junior parking lot.
Oh, okay.
And I think it was Lee who called the cops. And they asked Lee who he was, and he said, "I'm just a concerned citizen." But anyway, go ahead.
Well, I had to go up to school for something that night. I can't remember what it was, but we still had the old wings, that went out, the one that went out toward Mr. Vinny and the ag shop, Mr. Holland's science building. And I knew that sometimes those doors didn't, if a teacher showed up, sometimes they didn't always get closed back. So I walked down the hallway to just check the doors. And I never turned lights on because I could see the lights at the back. And so I never turned the lights on. Well, I get to the back door and there's a bunch of giggling kids running back and forth from, I assume, I found out later, I think they were going over to Judy Trail's house. And anyway, they were going to get paint, I think. One of my teachers was supplying it. So anyway, I saw Duff Snyder. I'll never forget Duff running by. And I think Carrie Walker was out there.
She may have been.
There was a mixture. It wasn't just that junior class. It was, I can't remember who all it was. But I know the Hines boy. What was the oldest Hines?
Was it Jamie Hines?
Jamie, yeah. He was in on it because, anyway, I went out there and I yelled at them. I said, "Get over here right now." And they didn't run. I guess it was respect. Sure. They all came back.
Sure. And
I said, "In the library tomorrow," and I gave them a specific time. I said, "If you're late, you don't want to be late." I said, I'm not even thinking right about what's going to happen if you're late. So I was furious. And anyway, I even had some parents. I remember Carl Williams came over to the house and said, "What are you going to do to them?" I said, "I haven't made up my mind yet." He said, "Well, see, they're just having fun. They weren't really hurting anything." Yeah, but it's destruction. I said, "They say it's tradition. I've been there about 5 years. No one's ever done that. Now, the seniors would paint theirs a little bit, their spot, and that was okay. But this was over in the underclassmen parking lot." So I said, "I haven't made up my mind." And so I finally decided, okay, the best thing to do is Saturday class, get them out there and make them clean it up. But that meant I had to go out there also on Saturday. So it's kind of like your parents grounding you and taking away TV. Well, they don't get to watch TV either. They say, "I need to think of something else next time." But anyway, we were out there and gosh, the day was running long and the kids were scrubbing and they were trying to get that latex paint off the parking lot. And they had done a heck of a job. I mean, they had pretty well painted most of it. And Jamie said, "Dad, Mr. Lackey, Dad's got a high-pressure sprayer at the feed store. Can I go get it and help us clean this up?" I said, "Hurry." Because I was ready to go home, too. What I didn't realize, and they did. They went out there and they just went along. They cleaned every little thing up and sprayed right along where the paint was. Well, guess what happens when you hit a high-pressure sprayer on asphalt and it dries a day later?
What's that?
It's etched into the asphalt.
No.
You can see every word, I mean, they didn't put anything ugly out there. They just put their names or whatever, their classes or whatever. But it was etched into the asphalt, and it stayed for months before it finally faded back out. But, so, and it just came to me. I think Becky was one of the ones that we were talking about what we're going to do. I said, well, you guys can just consider yourself the parking lot beautification committee. They put it in the yearbook. It's in there. And Becky says she even used it on her college application, said that she was a part of a parking lot beautification committee. So
hey, everybody won.
Yeah, everybody won. I got my point across. They got theirs across. They got to do what they wanted to do, and no harm.
Speaking of destruction of property, there was a time there where towns would get painted after the football game between George West and Three Rivers. And I remember our senior year, George West won. It was 34-6. And somebody...
They George West, so right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so somebody...
I heard a story.
Okay, well, they may coincide.
No, well, there was a painting on a piece of plywood waiting for the Three Rivers players when they got back home.
Yeah. That's
all I'll say.
that was made by Carlos Cortines at my dad's house without him knowing. We actually used the George West had made I guess like a pamphlet for the football team, and it was a muscular Longhorn lifting weights, and so that was part of the picture. But but that was waiting for them when they got back. But the other funny part was destruction of property. Home. His mother, I think it was him and a couple other guys. I can't remember, but I know it was him. When he got home after the football game, she handed him a bag full of spray paint. His mother did, and said, "If you don't go spray paint that town, I'm going." So that's what you were dealing with, Mr. Lackey. But you know what's funny is that rivalry kind of got out of hand after a while. Yeah. Kids kept fighting and getting aggressive. But you know, it's so fun to have that, even for all the generations that were before that. I mean,
look at how many couples formed between the two towns.
Yeah, yeah.
Kelly James went to Three Rivers. Rita Lane, our reading teacher, she went to Three Rivers, married to George West boy and Steve Lane.
Yeah.
And I think Malane McKinney's, one of her parents went to Three Rivers, I think. So, I mean, it's just so many connections between the two communities.
Sure.
And then I go back and look now and see where Tony Zuniga, one of the greatest running backs we ever had at George West, son plays for Three Rivers. How could he let that happen?
We don't know. We're still asking him.
Well, you got to go where you got to go, you know.
Chris Thomas and Vidal started Pop Warner down there several years ago, and I think to get enough kids, it turned into they made it a Live Oak County thing. Okay. So slowly. You started seeing more kids between George West and Three Rivers interact because of the little Pop Warner thing they had started. But before that, I told everybody I didn't own a single piece of red anything. You know, you didn't even, the refinery stunk. You didn't even go to that town.
I didn't either. It just wasn't done.
Yeah. So, I try and explain to my wife that type of rivalry, and I tell her, I said, you know, it's ingrained in you. You grow up watching your siblings play them, and you can't wait to play them again next year, you know, if you win or lose, you know, and it's bragging rights, and it's everybody. It's, you know, everybody wears blue, everybody wears red, and that's the Nueces River splits the two of you, and you may as well be on the moon.
Well, you also have the feelings that happened back when we had the hurricane that came through in 67. And Three Rivers flooded, and that's where they had the dike around town. I saw
pictures of that, yeah.
And as I understand it, and I'm probably going to tell a story I know very little about, but as I understand it, George West still wanted to play. We were supposed to play in Three Rivers, and George West still wanted to play, and Mr. Brown and whoever the powers were in George West offered to have the game moved to George West. And then there was, since Three Rivers didn't want to do that, you know, that caused some hard feelings. But I remember Billy Campbell telling me one time that he opened up the field house so Three Rivers could bring their athletic equipment over and put it in their dryers and start drying it all out. So, and
It's good.
I forgot about Billy, so I just had to mention that story. He was a wonderful character.
I was gonna get to him. What was he like? Because I'll tell you, for us, I feel like he was similar to you in the sense that he knew what was in front of him.
He did.
treated us
He
different.
is, as far as a principal wanting certain things from your programs, I wished he'd give me a little bit more. But he had a great relationship with the kids. I mean, the kids loved him, and the boys did. But then, see, I had Kathy Taylor on the other side, who ran as far as I was concerned, the perfect PE program, physical education program.
She was something else.
She was. I mean, they did bowling, they did dance, they did badminton. She gave them kind of like the PE program I went through in high school, where our teachers had the whole gamut of different sports. It wasn't just, all right, guys, I'm going to sit here and make something out of wire while you run around the football field.
That's exactly
and the
what it
winner's
was.
going to get this, but yeah, but
That's exactly.
I knew it was fruitless to try to get much more out of him, because Billy was a folk hero. I mean, he was everybody in town loved him.
Oh yeah.
And one of the great football players to come out of George West. So I tell you a funny. I had found this discipline process whereby you, if a kid was caught throwing rocks, then you made him go out there and pick up rocks. It was things like that.
Yeah.
And so acorn season would come around, and those oak trees produced a lot of weaponry. Yeah. And so I was telling Billy about it. He said, I'm going to use that. And so he got a 5-gallon bucket, and if kids were throwing acorns, he took that 5-gallon bucket and made them go fill it up. I said, what'd you do with the acorns? He said, I put them in my deer feeder. He said, these guys can harvest acorns like no tomorrow, and so that was funny.
He talked to us. He never talked to us like a disciplinarian. He talked to us like your cooler uncle. You can do better than that. Yeah,
kind of deal.
He was very, and
it worked.
What's funny is like everybody respected him.
Yeah.
I remember, it's funny you talked about his style. I remember one day, we made an atto-latto to throw spears. He took us out to next to the tennis courts.
Yeah.
Had a couple of sticks, and he would whittle on them a little bit, and he would show us how to throw an atto-latto. And it was like, in hindsight, I told my wife, I'm like, well, we were throwing spears in junior high, in elementary. But, he would do that. He did a lot of leather work. And he did a lot of things where I remember myself and a few other guys with me, he was so interesting. Like, so we wanted to watch him work on people's gloves or watch him tape people's ankles.
He could fix anything.
He was so amazing.
And take a piece of baling wire, and by the time by the time the winner had run that lap, he had turned it into something, and the winner got it. So I wonder if any of those pieces of art are still out there somewhere.
I'm sure they've got to be, because he
you
made
like me,
so
you
much.
never won the race, so you never got one.
I never got anything. I don't even know if I finished. I probably cut. I'll tell you a funny story, and it's not very funny, but it's funny. At least the start of it isn't. But my buddy Isaac, I don't know what he was thinking, but he needed to spit, and he spit on the wall. So we're in 6th grade, and Coach Campbell lines us all up, and he says, "Who spit on the wall?" And nobody's talking, So he says, all right. And he doesn't get mad. He just says, all right. He says, line up. We're gonna get licks. Coach's office. Everybody get in line. And so everybody gets in line. And so he walks into the office. And it was so funny because, like, everybody that was at the front of the line, when he closed that door, they ran to the back of the line. And he had so much experience with us. He came back out and he goes, oh, by the way, he goes, the more I spank, the more warm I get, and I start spanking harder at the end. And he goes back in the room, and all the kids that ran back to the front. And so finally he came out and he goes, "This is the last chance." And I think it was another kid, I forget his name, but he goes, it was Isaac. And then finally everybody's like, it was Isaac. We all got out of licks. I don't even think he made Isaac I don't think he spanked Isaac. I think he just had him clean it. But he was hilarious. Another time we faked getting licks. He was like, hey, I'm going to hit the bottom of my shoe. Just scream. And I was like, he'd hit his shoe and and the guys were just looking in the door trying to see what was going on. When he passed away, I think I went to his services, and I hope I don't screw this up, but I want to say he made his own pine box.
Wouldn't surprise me one bit. Yeah.
I think he would burn some Western themes around it.
Yeah.
I want to say it even had horseshoes on
Wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, so that guy was something else. It's funny because there were so many different flavors for us growing up. There was you, there was him, there was Miss Donaldson, there was Mr. Nicholson, there were the Meekses, and it's so interesting because all these people that even back then you leave school and you go, I didn't care for that teacher too much. They didn't do much for me as far as like learning or whatever. But in hindsight, you always go, man, that you don't realize the influence that you guys have on us till we become older and we go, man, that was a great story.
Well, I hope the teachers would, because I would leave them with this quite often. I said, how do you want these guys, it's not how we remember them, but how do you want them to remember you in 15 years or 20 years?
Yeah.
And when you're dealing with them. And so I think a lot of them treated you that way. So let me mention another teacher, and she still amazes me, and I didn't get to see her that day because they were on spring break. But Glenda Locke is still teaching
Is she really?
at high school. Yeah, and still doing from what I understand, she always did a phenomenal job. And it always broke my heart she wasn't an Aggie. I just knew she would have made a wonderful Aggie. But she went to that other school in Austin, and we would always have a little bet on the football games. Either one person would either get Orange Crush or the other one would get a New Grape or something, something maroonish. So we had a simple bet, but
she was something else too. And then
I
Coach
walked by her
Taylor.
class one day and they had the body of a person taped on the floor, and of course it got my attention. I walked in, and I said, "Miss Locke, what's going on?" She said, "Mr. Lackey, we've had something terrible happen. We've had a murder in our class." I said, "Really?" She said, "Yep. Well, we're going to find out who did it." They were doing basic DNA testing.
Really?
And she was showing this was her advanced biology class and AP biology, and she had taken blood samples from all of them, little sample, and picked one of them to be the one that did it. And so they were going to have to, through testing, find out who it was that did it. And they did. About 2 days later, the results came out, and they knew who it
That's
who had
awesome.
done it. Yeah. So I'll never forget that lesson.
She was amazing. Mr. Vinny, the Reynas.
Mr. Reyna.
Mr. Reyna.
Yeah, loved him.
Coach Lins, Coach Scott, Coach Rogers. There was just so many. And again, it's kind of like all these flavors that kind of contributed to us becoming who we were. Yeah. They all treated, and it's funny because they all treated us similar in the sense that they didn't treat us with kid gloves. They didn't treat us terribly, and it was very informal, right? It wasn't.
I think they try to treat you with respect.
Yeah. Yeah.
And kids like to be treated with respect. You don't fool a teenager. You don't buffalo them. You don't browbeat them. You guide them.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like herding cattle. You just kind of hope that they go the right direction. But they're going to step out of line a little bit every now and then.
Sure.
That's all right. That's all right. We'll get them back in line, and they'll be okay. So you talk about Marshall Rogers. I remember when he retired. Marshall had I think he had a class or two down at junior high. He was an avid coffee drinker. Always had a coffee cup in his hand. But what he would do when he would go into the teacher's lounge, I don't know if he had a coffee cup, but he would find a cup.
Yeah.
And it would make its way down to junior high. And some teacher would come back and say, I can't find my cup. Well, Marshall probably had it. And then they may work their way back up. But when he retired, we each gave him a coffee cup. we had a box of 30-something coffee cups we gave him. So here, that's enough to hold you over for now. So.
One of my favorite stories with him, we had his class. I think he was teaching like geography or something. and Jason Schultz was in there. And
I have Jason on Facebook also. I enjoy Jason.
he had Jason had taken some test, and I don't know what test it was. We all told him it was because he was special needs, and they made him take this test. And so we made fun of him. You know, that's what your friends do, right? They pick on you. And so in between classes, it was this terrible loose leaf paper, pencil written document with a test after it. And we even made like some fake state of Texas seal. It looked like a 3-year-old made it. Well, we put it in an envelope on Mr. Rogers' desk. And we told him, when it had a note, make sure Jason takes this test. He pulls it out and he goes, Jason Schultz, come pick up your test. And we called him Chukits. Chukits goes up there and he gets it and he's like, what is this? This isn't even real. And I think we even wrote from Mr. Lackey. And he goes, it's got Mr. Lackey's name on it. You got to take the test. And we cracked up because he made Jason take that test. And they had the dumbest questions on there. But Jason went and sat and filled it out and turned it back. Oh, he was so funny. You know, I always tell people this is strange. And maybe I'm wrong. Everybody thinks their stuff's the best. But I always tell people, I feel like our group of guys landed in this weird transition area. You know, back when you could get away with things like that, when you had personalities who in the classroom, you had personalities who taught, you had personalities who worked there, the kids were personalities, and you had this line where there wasn't this rigidity, right? You had structure, but it wasn't this weird thing where now nobody can do this, nobody can do that, you know, things are oversensitive. You know, I feel like we straddled that. We were kind of this is just a feeling. I feel like we straddled that time period where we got to enjoy that. Because I will tell you this, as grown men and everybody that I know, everybody that I stayed friends with or am friends with, everybody's got their hiccups in life, but everybody's doing well. Everybody's caring. Everybody's a good person. Everybody.
Well, you take those life experiences and you use them. Mm-hmm. You remember them, and you know right from wrong. You always knew right from wrong, sure. but and I think what we try to do is we had rules, we had structure, but I think we tried to avoid that one size fits all mentality. We would, again, I'd go back to, why did you do that, Gabe? Yeah. What were you thinking at the time? What made you do this? And sometimes you'd find that a kid's having a really rough life at home. And when you get to talking to them, and you'll be amazed, behind my closed doors, what I've had parents tell me about their personal life and who's doing what with whom and why they're acting the way they are and why the kids are behaving the way they are. And they'll tell you anything. And which, when I first heard that was a shock to me that I knew more than I wanted to know, I think, sometimes. But you've got to use all those because it's. I did a few of those, and a few of the things I did, I think I actually wish I hadn't done it that way. But I'm not going to bring those up because
sure.
But still. I'm sure as kids, you guys think, well, he just did that and he forgets about it. We never forget. We remember, just like you remember. Sure. We remember what we did to a kid and hope it didn't screw him up for too long anyway.
My brother Vidal always tells a story about, I guess it was senior trip, I think it was. And he says, you know, Mr. Lackey said, I'm putting y'all at the end of the hallway, away from the rest of us. He said, y'all don't get in trouble. and you know, he said, we had a great time. He said, we probably took some things with us that we got away with that we shouldn't have. He said, but we did what he told us. We stayed in our end of the hallway and we didn't get in trouble.
Well, with Vidal, you had to do that because you could hear him.
Yeah.
he was vocal. And you know, we weren't stupid. We knew things. Now, we did search some luggage one time, and we caught a young lady with some residue of some things she shouldn't have had, and that was an unfortunate way to start the trip. But but we dealt with it, and I think the message got. I mean, we were doing it just kind of a random look, a search, run the dog over. We didn't open luggage and sort through things, so. I think we did. I don't know. I may have had the girls go one way and the boys the other, but we had heard that things were starting to stir up. You know, things were coming into our community that we wished wouldn't. But you know, we knew things might happen. As long as we got everybody home safe and sound, we were okay. And I went on a lot of senior trips. I went on every one with George West, I think, and then in Bruni, Jan and I started out. We were actually the junior sponsors. In fact, in that little town, once you were the junior sponsor, you were always the junior sponsor, which meant you did the prom and you did everything. And then the senior sponsors really were a couple of older teachers, and they didn't really want to go on the senior trip. And Jan and I were just a few years older than the seniors, especially that first year we went. I was 22, and the seniors were 18 and 19.
Wow, you were that young?
Yeah, I started teaching at 22.
Wow.
And got out of college in 72 and was teaching in 72. So, when you do the 4-year thing and you don't spend much time in college, you get to work pretty fast. So,
yeah, when you do it like you're supposed to.
Yeah. I've got I don't have many of the older Bruni kids. In fact, as I went back and visited with them the other day, I found out that a number of them we've lost them, and it's really sad because some of them went through some tough times. But there's, and I'll mention his name. I always called him Frankie Laurel. He goes by Frank now. Frank was a big boy. I mean, he was like I don't know, at least 6'3", maybe 6'4", 220 in high school. He's the one and only, well, I think George was with him, but he's the one and only boy I ever paddled in Bruni. And I did the first year. And I guess they figured if I would paddle the biggest one, I'd take on any of them. But Frank is I
think you're supposed to do the same thing in prison. You go after the bigger one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't do it on purpose.
Yeah.
Frank was just, we were getting ready for class, and he walked off, and I said, "Where are you going?" And he said, "I'm going home." I said, "No, get back over here." "No, I'm going home." He kept going. And I learned at that point, don't ever chase them.
Sure.
Because they got to come back sooner or later. Mm-hmm. You know, that was our philosophy. They'll come back to us. And I told him, before you start class, 3 licks. Okay. It was like hitting a brick wall. I mean, I didn't hurt him at all. I tried, but I didn't. But
it was like hitting a baseball in the handle.
Frank lives up here around Church or somewhere like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He went in the military and became military police, and I think he had a law enforcement career. So he did real well for himself. Can you
see kids' futures that young? Like, there's got to be a time where you go, okay, well, this kid is geared that way. Like, I like to use Benny Cantu. Benny needed structure.
Yeah.
I think one of the best things Benny did was going into the military, because Benny needed that structure. You know, so him going provided him a career, provided him opportunity to grow up a little bit longer, because he wasn't doing it by 18. You know, he needed a couple more years. But do you see that in kids a lot of times, or not so much?
It's tough. I'll be honest with you. You just hope and pray that you guide them enough that they find something, and they'll help them out. Because I don't know that I know a couple of boys went off to A&M, got their engineering degree, and I would have bet anything they would have just been party hounds.
Oh.
But they're doing extremely well right now. I mean, so you know that it can be done. That's why I would never tell a kid. I know I've had teachers. My counselor in high school told me, "So, well, you'll go to college and you might be a B.C. student, and that's about the best you can do." How can you tell a kid that? I mean, he's thinking about going to college and doing the best he can do, and you're already telling him he's going to be mediocre. That's not your job. So our job was just to encourage them and say, "Yeah, you know, if you'll do these things, it'll work out for you." And I've had a number of kids write me back sometimes and say, "You know, if you hadn't," I tell you a good one, and I could do several from George West, but this one, I was retired, and I was working for John Overall doing caps and gowns and rings, and he had Laredo schools in there. And I was in the office at Martin High School. And John was with me, and he was talking to the secretary and getting things lined up. And there was a young teacher there, and he came over and he said, "Are you Mr. Lackey?" I said, "Yeah." He said, I didn't recognize the young man. He said, "You don't remember me, but I'm so-and-so, and I used to be at United High School where you were assistant principal." And he said, "I want to thank you for getting me straight and convincing me that where I was going was wrong, and I need to get back on line." And he said, "Because of you, I'm here today." I have no clue what I said to the young man. I wish I'd known. I could have bottled it and kept it, and peddled it. But I think you just keep that same philosophy all the way through your career, and hopefully it touches a number of kids. I'm sure it didn't work on all of them.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry it didn't, but
I mean,
I'm glad for the ones that it did.
That's a good example for folks to realize the impact, the potential impact they're making when they're not even realizing.
In a 5-minute conversation you have with that young man, and he took it to heart, and I had no clue he would or not. It was up to him. I just put it out there, and you do with it what you want to. So,
do you think part of that at times is kind of a continuation of your father or your parents?
Oh, definitely.
Sharing.
Well, it starts with them, but then I like I said before, I had some wonderful teachers in school. People in the community. I mean, it wasn't always just teachers, but I don't know if you remember when you go through Freer, there used to be 4 service stations right on the corner, and the Exxon or the Humble was owned by Pete Hunter, and Pete was a big supporter of the community. He was one of the sponsors of the Little League teams. My friend John Anderson's dad was a coach on the Little League team. My dad coached for 18 years Little League. Al Schoeneman, who owned the Ford dealership, he was one of the coaches on the Lions, I think, and all of those guys, I think through the fact that they were involved with young people, impacted us. And I see you talk about the Pop Warner leagues that got started in George West. It's great to see our young men and women, our young men in that case, getting involved with the kids and passing on what they learned.
Yeah.
So.
I got another little message I want to play for you. Lee wanted to share something.
Okay.
I haven't listened to it, so we'll have to. Hopefully, Lee didn't get too rowdy.
Lee came out to Florida once, and we hooked up. He and his wife and
oh, really?
Boy. Yeah, I took him to Disney one afternoon. So.
Let's see what he got.
Hey, Mr. Lackey, you're a great man. And the people of George West were lucky to have you mentoring hundreds and hundreds of kids. You set the tone for the school with the kids and the faculty. I remember getting called to the office one time in the 4th grade. You counseled me and corrected me fairly, firmly. And I also remember never wanting to get sent back to the office again. Really more not to disappoint you was the bigger thing. It's been great watching you and Jan living that retired life. I remember when we visited Orlando, told my son, hey, I'm going to reach out to my old high school principal, see what he's up to. He thought I was crazy. He still thinks it's crazy that people from our town really looked up to their principal and, as mentors, and even outside of school wanted to reach out to him. It was great seeing him talk to Jan. They hit it off really well. I think he's probably 11 or so at that time, and really reminded my mom and him how they would interact. And it was great catching up with you. I'm looking forward. I thank Gabe for getting you booked on this podcast, and like I said, looking forward to listening to it. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, Lee. They came out to Florida, and he hooked up with me, and we went out. And that's before Jan had Alzheimer's, and so it was a great moment. And I've had people say, "Why would your students want to come and see you?" I said, "I don't know." I said, "We not only were principal and student, but we were colleagues. We were friends. I love what they did, and I love watching them grow up. And now they're having families, and it's just been a blessing to see all of that, be a part of it." So.
When my senior year, you're talking about caps and gowns. I told my wife, I said, I said, I wasn't doing very well in one of the classes. I said, I didn't even take a senior picture. I didn't order a cap and gown. I said, at the end of the school year, Mr. Lackey called me in and told me that I'd passed. I said, and he handed me a cap and gown that I didn't order. That always stuck with me, and I really appreciate you for doing that.
Well, it didn't cost us that much to order a few extras and get what, and we had confidence that it would get there.
Yeah.
And I certainly didn't want to be caught without one.
Sure.
In case you made it.
Yeah.
So.
But I had already quit on it, and you hadn't, and I really appreciate that because that meant a lot to me even to this day. I'll ask you this. We'll wrap up with this.
All right.
Because I don't want you to get back too late. I don't want you getting locked out. You've influenced a lot of young men and women. A lot of young men and women who are now parents and some even grandparents. So here we are 30 years later, 40 years later, whatever it may be. What is some advice you can give those kids now that they're adults that they can carry with them the next 20 years?
Oh, gosh. Well, might get a little philosophical, I guess, but be true to yourself. Love your spouse every day. I don't know if you've heard the last Toby Keith song about "Don't Let the Old Man In." Keep moving forward. Don't get old before you have to. I mean, and this isn't bragging, but the other day I played the golf course at. It is bragging, I guess.
Brag.
I was playing the golf course at Lady Bird, Johnson, in Fredericksburg. The first hole was 360 yards. And it was downhill, I grant that. And there was very little grass. And I probably hit one of the best shots I've hit in my life. When I got through, it was only 66 yards out. So I pushed 300 yards.
Wow.
I don't do that on a regular basis. In fact, I rarely do that. But I keep playing. I don't play well, but I keep playing because I want to just keep moving. And I've heard that from a lot of people that have gotten very old, and they'll say, just keep moving forward. Treat people like you want to be treated. The golden rule's been around a long time, and it works pretty well for most of us. Again, love your kids, support your kids, support your neighbor's kids, I guess that's what I'd have to say. Just I probably had time to think about it, could come up with something grand and wonderful, but I just think you have to treat people with respect, even when they don't always deserve it sometimes. But do the best you can. That would be it.
Mr. Lackey, I appreciate you. I thank you for coming out and coming on, and I love you.
I love you too, Gabe, and thank you for inviting me. I was nervous about doing this, still a little nervous, but
you did great.
I'm glad we had the opportunity to do it.
Yes, sir.
And I'm a big believer in being a buckaroo from Freer, but once you're a Longhorn, you're always a Longhorn, George West.
Yes, sir. We bleed blue.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Gabe Molina Podcast.